Minutes away from the White House, it's Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. An audience of nearly 1,700, including some of America's toughest warriors in history, was inside the theater watching the play Our American Cousin by the English playwright Tom Taylor. In addition, from the 3 floors of seating inside the theater, there was a box right above the stage at the balcony level where the presidential party had taken their seats to watch the play. Inside the presidential box were 4 occupants: the President Lincoln himself, his wife Mary Lincoln, Major Henry Rathbone, and his fiancée Clara Harris. From the view of the audience on the theater floors, these 4 occupants were clearly visible. What no one couldn't see was another man lurking in the shadows, just behind the president, holding a gun in his hand, waiting for the moment to strike. As much as out of the blue it seemingly happened, the dots led right back to the end of the American Civil War. 6 days before Abraham Lincoln took his final breaths, the American Civil War was nearing its final chapter. The Union Army took over the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. In the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse, one of the last battles of the Civil War, Confederate General Robert Lee surrendered to the Union General 𝐸𝐵𝐿 Grant. The war was officially over, but some Confederate states in the South had not yet surrendered and still believed in the Confederate cause. One man of similar thoughts was John Wilkes Booth, the would-be assassin of Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth was a prominent actor and a national celebrity of his time. He believed in the Confederate cause of slavery and was an outspoken supporter of the Confederates' policies, putting him in direct rivalry with Abraham Lincoln's approach to abolition of slavery throughout all U.S. states after the 13th Amendment. At Lincoln's second inauguration, which Booth also attended, he addressed his beliefs that the primary cause of the war was the culture of slavery in the South, the culture with which Booth sympathized. When the Confederate cause demoralized with the end of the Civil War, Booth planned a much bigger plot to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William Seward simultaneously with other conspirators in hope to revive the lost cause. The opportunity presented itself on the day of the assassination, when Booth visited Ford's Theater, and while picking up his mail, he learned that President Lincoln and General Grant were scheduled to attend the theater later that evening. From Booth's perspective, the opportunity could not have been better. A well-known actor himself, he had performed at Ford's Theater several times before and knew the place inside out. His rivals President Lincoln and General Ulysses Grant, the man who played a major role in the defeat of Confederate forces, would both be at the same place at the same time. At around 8:30 in the evening, the presidential party arrived at Ford's Theater. Along with the Lincolns were Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris. Unfortunately for Booth and many of the spectators who had come to see the war hero General Grant, he could not accompany the Lincolns to the theater. The party entered through the main entrance, took the stairs to the second floor, and proceeded around the dress circle to reach the door leading to the presidential box. As the presidential party settled into the 2 adjoining boxes above the stage, Booth made his final preparations for the assassination. He met with other conspirators assigned to kill the vice president who was staying at Kirkwood House, and the Secretary of State who was at home recovering from injuries inflicted from a previous carriage accident. They agreed to launch their attack simultaneously after 10 p.m. that night and discussed their escape plan. Booth positioned his getaway horse close to the rear gate of the theater, and then went to a nearby tavern to have a few drinks before the assassination. At approximately 10 minutes past 10, Booth entered Ford's Theater from the front entrance. He took the stairs to the second floor and proceeded around the dress circle to the presidential box. Fortunately for Booth, that night at Ford's Theater, Lincoln's usual security measures were lacking. His personal guard was away on an assignment in Richmond, and the man responsible for guarding the Lincolns that night had taken a break at intermission and gone to a nearby tavern. The only person at the gate leading to the presidential box was Charles Forbes, Lincoln's valet, who allowed him to pass through the door when Booth showed him his calling card. Once he was inside the presidential box, it was seemingly inevitable. Booth closed the outer door behind him and placed a wooden brace between the door and the wall to barricade everyone inside. He waited for the moment of loud laughter from the audience to mask the sound of the gunshot. When the moment arrived, he fired his weapon. The bullet struck the back of Lincoln's head just behind left ear, penetrating his brain. Booth immediately dropped his gun and pulled out a dagger, stabbing Major Rathbone in his arm. He then leaped from the presidential box, a 12-foot drop onto the stage, and shouted "Sic Semper Tyrannis," meaning "thus always to tyrants." Many in the audience thought it was part of the play, unlike Major Joseph Stewart, who jumped onto the stage and followed Booth to the rear door. Booth quickly made his way to the horse and escaped from the theater before Joseph Stewart could reach him. Back in the presidential box, Charles Leale, a Union Army surgeon, rushed to the doorway but failed to open the external door. Upon noticing the wooden brace securing the door, Major Rathbone removed the brace, allowing Charles Leale to enter the box. Leale quickly located the gunshot wound behind Lincoln's left ear, but the bullet was too deep to be removed. He worked to maintain Lincoln's breathing by clearing blood clots, but the wound was mortal. A group of soldiers carried Lincoln to the nearby house of a tailor named William Peterson, where he spent his remaining hours in the state of hemorrhage, laying on bed. The next morning, at around 7:22 a.m., Lincoln died as his breathing grew quieter. The attacks on the Vice President and Secretary of State failed, as the largest hunt in U.S. history began for the fugitives, where thousands of federal troops and many civilians took part in the search. 12 days into the search, John Wilkes Booth was finally caught and shot dead in a barn near Port Royal, Virginia.